expanded for the World War II history. And then just to show you, this is like revision 27. So I used to use this for the curator's tour that we no longer do. But I keep learning, I keep correcting things that I find. But a lot of it is based on, I've got the World War II war decorated, and try to every once in a while update. But one of the things I tried to do is put the 4 Iowas into context, like kind of like what was behind them being built. And so I started out with really the end of World War I with the battleships, and you'll learn in a couple of minutes. But this is at the beginning of World War I in 1914, and they spent so much money on warships and their navies. That was the arms race at the time. And you can see where I put down England had 22 battleships. Depending on what you want to call a battleship, you could get into that debate. They were building 13, Germany had 15, was building 5, America had 10, and was building 4. And here's a colorized photo of the Iron Duke. But what this led to is to prevent another naval arms race that was so expensive to so many different countries. They came up with the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922. And without going into a lot of detail, because it gets really involved, that limited like tonnage, size of guns, the number of warships you could build, etc. Then they extended the treaty in 1930 in London. They had a second London Navy treaty. This time Japan and Italy said, no, we're not participating. You can see the war clouds were starting to form. And by the time, Germany was doing all kinds of things behind the scene. By the time World War II started, the treaty was basically, null and incomplete, no longer in effect. So what that meant to America is we didn't commission a battleship for 18 years. So the last one for that 18-year period was the West Virginia. You can see the fighting topseer and the cage mast. And then the North Carolina, not until April 41, was when we commissioned our battleship, the latest battleships. So the impact was huge to people in that industry, the armor factories that were making armored guns, etc., etc. And so the 4th Colorado class, the Washington, 76% complete. They ended up using it as a gun target. And then you can see this South Dakota class, they're 30-some% complete. This is a picture of Iowa being built. Of course, you can see the BB-53 Iowa. You can see the barbettes. So those were all scrapped. And this is what they were going to look like. They had this funky funnel. Here's your cage mass. They also had 16-inch 50 calibers, although I believe they were wire wound. They were a little bit different. And turbo-electric propulsion, but they were never built. So what was caught at Pearl Harbor were really modified World War I battleships. So here's the poor Washington being fired upon from the New York, and the Texas in the background. And that was the end of her. I also like to point out to people that this is a postcard colorized, and you can see the Long Beach. There's the Rainbow Pier, I believe it was called.
Yep.
And just Signal Hill up here with all the oil wells. Just look at all the open property. Oh my goodness, wouldn't you like to own some of that today?
I can see Downey from here.
Yeah. So anyhow, behind the Los Angeles breakwater was what was called Battleship Country, and that was like synonymous with San Pedro Bay. And during this time period, they had various numbers, but 17 battleships were behind the breakwater. And so in 1940, President Roosevelt, as a warning or a buffer to Japan, sent the battleships out to Pearl Harbor, and that's where they got caught December 7th. So the families did not move out there. And so the first people that really felt the impact, partially from World War II, were right in this general area. So first battleships built, commissioned in 18 years, but started construction in 16 years. You had the North Carolina class, sister ship Washington, they were called out at $77 million. And then the follow-on was the smaller, underneath the treaties, the South Dakota class. And then you had the sister ships, Indiana, Massachusetts, Alabama. Then I put this together. I thought it was interesting. So on December 7th, we had the 8 battleships Pearl Harbor. One was in Bremerton, a bit overhaul. And then out in the Atlantic, you had 6. And then the 2 new folks, North Carolina and Washington, were on shakedown cruises. So at the beginning of World War II, we had 17 battleships. And this is just a cool shot of the California. Now, when it came to designing or finding the need for the Iowa-class battleships, what they became worried about was what was taking place in Japan that we either did know or didn't know, and the British intelligence was telling us like they're making all kinds of improvements, they're building these gigantic, which ended up being Yamato and Musashi, and we didn't believe it. But anyhow, this is a picture colorized of the Mitsu and their sister ship Nagato. They had 26 knot speed, and that wasn't matched until the North Carolina class came out. Then, worse yet, they improved these secretly, I think a second time, is my understanding. The 4 Congo class, they used to be battle cruisers, they wound up calling them battleships. And they were faster than all the United States battleships until the Iowas were built. So, I'm going to talk about battleship myths, and I still hear this. The other day I heard some guy on the New Jersey that the Iowas were built to be an aircraft carrier escort. That's simply not true. They were building a battleship class capable of chasing down and defeating anything it might meet because of this fear factor of what Japan had been doing. And here's the folks at work without calculators, etc. Now, I just picked this up the other day, and I was fascinated by it because this is the Secretary of Navy, Charles Edison. He went on to be the governor of New Jersey. There was a group of people that did not want the shipyards to continue building battleships. They wanted them to go to aircraft carriers. So this is the Senate Naval Affairs Committee. I'm trying to find records if they had any meetings or not. But on the back of this photograph, it said he was defending building fast battleships. Admiral King was in favor of that, and also Roosevelt was in favor of that. The other thing that's really ironic, see the date, May of 1940? Guess what? It's 1 month before they put the keel down. It was that close that these ships might not have ever been built.
So Dave, could I just interject? So
Yeah.
Charles Edison was actually promoting building aircraft carriers instead. Is
No,
that
he
right?
was defending
the
battleships.
battleships. Got it. Okay.
Now, it did help that he was going to be governor of New Jersey, and the second battleship was named New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Iowa, the vice president with Roosevelt was from Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, this is a number, we throw out a lot, 110 million. I've seen 125 million. This is just a side note. And I'm wondering if this doesn't include the price of the guns, the optical rangefinders, et cetera, et cetera. That's just for the ship. I'd love to see some contract, if I could ever find something like that. That would be so much fun to do. And to try to calculate what one of these would cost today, this is just a ballpark. Throw it out there.
William?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The 110 million was the average. The Iowa itself was 100. The Wisconsin was 120.
Okay.
Missouri was 111.
Okay. So does that pick up the guns and everything?
Yes.
It does.
Does not pick up.
Oh.
There's certain equipment, radar stuff like that.
Yeah.
Didn't pick that up.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to see a breakout of all that. But anyhow, the point here was roughly 40% greater than the previous battleship class, which freaked out Congress. Launched 7 months ahead of schedule. I was just going through the bridge logs, and I ran across, even after the commissioning date, February 22nd, they had up to 2,000, 3,000 shipyard workers and 3 different ships on board for several weeks afterwards. There was still a lot left to do. And we brag about the ship was commissioned in 32 months. Yes, but there was still a lot going on. So here's a great picture of the launch. There's some wonderful pictures I've got from the National Archives. So they're under construction, different points in time. Here's Mrs. Wallace, the wife of the vice president. This champagne holder, the wine holder, is at the Wallace House in Des Moines, Iowa, on display. And this is Captain Kennedy, I believe it was. He was the commander of the shipyard. Here's a rare color photographs. They were still pretty rare. We've got tickets and things like that in our archives. So, and this is from the ship workers newspaper, the Navy Yard. They gave all kinds of facts and figures. They claimed this was the largest weight in U.S. history to be launched. Right next door, Missouri was being constructed. And here's some more of the just great pictures that came out from that day. You can see the superstructure interior here and a little bit of the barbettes that are covered. And look at all the steamboat tugs too. But here's the Missouri. They just began construction down here. That was a big whoop-de-doo day for sure. And we'll just throw in a couple pictures of them working on the guns. They're getting ready to pull them over to the ship. You can see the funnels. There's for the aft Mark 38. And this is a great photo too. This is the skeleton where the armor would be attached, the main armor. And here's your central core of the superstructure.
So it's not; those are not the actual armor plates. Those are just the plates that the armor plate is.
Yeah, that's
Backing plates, they call them.
backing plates. Okay.
Yeah, that's what the armor was actually bolted to.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. There's Jim Slade from the Battleship New Jersey wrote a book. It's nothing but armor. That it's talking about rivet counting. I mean, some of it's way over my head, and I depend on Jim Koresh every once in a while for these engineering things. You know.
He's done a few books of this.
Yeah. I think that's the second one. Now he's doing one on the hull of the islands.
James Musaw has got the books.
Oh.
He hasn't even shown them to me.
Oh, I think we got the armor one in my office. So anyhow, here's a great picture I love. Just getting up there. I used to have 12 hours, but now I just changed this as of last night. So I think they were working 24 hours a day, I guess. Like sometimes there's some, it's hard to find some information. So you take your best shot. Later on, like I said, I make changes because I found that wasn't correct. This is a great photo too. Of course, this is on top of Turret 3, January 15th. So that's only about a month before she'll be commissioned. And, you can see the catapults here. So here's commissioning date. I didn't update this. That was her 75th birthday. I stopped doing the curator's tours in 2018. But yeah, just a great picture of the commissioning. And the Secretary of the Navy called Iowa the greatest ship ever launched by the American nation at that point in time. Now this photograph I picked up also, I just thought it was amazing. Look at the difference between the Maryland 1917 design versus the 1938 design of Iowa. Just, I think, awesome comparison. So, and just her first assignment, I think most of you guys already know this, was really a working up phase because the crew was new. They're learning their jobs. They're learning how to work with all the equipment. But they went up to Newfoundland and called it the Tirpitz Watch in case Tirpitz just did break out to attack the convoys. Iowa would be there, along with some other ships that were occupied there too. You can see the 40 millimeters on their gun tubs here.
And the Tirpitz was actually somewhere else, right?
Oh, she was back. Yeah, back in Europe.
She was,
Yeah, if she got out to the sea lanes.
She was up in the Norwegian fjords.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of photographs I've seen, they airbrush out the radars because they were considered classified or top secret. So anyhow, just another great picture, getting ready to go to war. So I threw in a picture of the Tirpitz ship, 15-inch guns, of course, sister ship to the Bismarck. If she made it out there, she would have been could have been interesting. Let's put it that way. But I think we had the best optical range fire control. I wanted to point out too is like, yes, the aircraft were taking over, but at least in the Atlantic, there were still ships getting sunk by, battle cruisers, battleships, whatever it might be.
Battleships.
Yep. So here's the Glorious, the aircraft carrier, and her two escorting destroyers, the Costa and Arden, sunk by the Scharnhorst and Eisenhower with over 1,500 killed. So it could still happen. There's a horrible picture with a 15-mile shot. So going down. So everybody talks about aircraft, but the threat was still out there with battleships, battle cruisers, cruisers.
Well, that wasn't the Glorious.
Oh, wasn't?
It was the Courageous.
This picture?
Yeah, the sister ship, she hit a mine and sank. Oh, Glorious was burning from bow to stern when she sank.
Oh, okay. I'll have to get another picture. See, there we go. Case in point. So Captain McRae took command of Iowa. He was President Roosevelt's naval attaché. And so they had a real close relationship. They knew each other really well. When the Iowa surfaced, McRae went after that opportunity. And one of the modifications that took place for the comfort of President Roosevelt was installation of a tub. I don't know how or why it started, but the rumor or the myth was the only bathtub on an American warship, which just simply is not true. And I've actually collected photographs and deck plans. And there's a book I just captured, and this gentleman was part of President Roosevelt's organizer for when he was traveling. And he talked about a kit that was on the West Coast and the East Coast for items that were brought on board warships for the president's comfort. And they raised like the bed. They had these elevators that they would put on the outside for him to go up through different decks. And there's pictures of how they set up the interior of the captain's cabin. There's a smoking stand. There's a ramp over here. Of course, outside is the veranda, as we call it today. And you can see the bed's a little bit taller right here. This is a flag that stopped in use for 1945.
Did Vicky spend most of his time with?
I don't know how much time, but he was hanging around there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've collected all kinds of information on the voyage. I went out and there's about 16 warships that were escorting at one point in time or other Iowa. She went across the Atlantic. And I downloaded all the war diaries. And so I'm picking up all kinds of information. And that leads to some other point I mentioned. So now on board were some incredible people. George Marshall, you can see what all he's known for. Harry Hopkins, Roosevelt's advisor. And then you had Hap Arnold, aviation pioneer, general of the largest Air Force. Admiral Leahy, highest ranking military chief of the Joint Staffs. Mr. Nice Guy, Admiral King. Right? Yeah, there's all kinds of stories about him. And there's a lot of documentation, a lot of great books about their interaction on the Atlantic during the voyage. It's really some interesting stuff I've been learning. So we always talk about when they were on board the ship, them and their different backup groups, their State Department folks, their stenographers, their planners, all these people were making final plans, the briefing they were going to present to Churchill before they talked to Stalin, and then they also Shanghai Shek to keep him informed in Cairo, the Chinese staff there. But this was for Operation Overlord, Normandy invasion. The maritime part was Operation Neptune. Now, one thing I just learned too that was interesting, everybody thought for the Allied Supreme Commander for the invasion was going to be General Marshall. And it got down to the point where neither King or Roosevelt wanted to lose him and his capabilities to Washington, D.C. So they wound up with great confidence too with General Eisenhower. But all those conversations were definitely taking place on board the ship.
Now, on the Roosevelt voyage, did it drop Roosevelt off in Mirza Kabir?
Yes.
And then Iowa went down to South America?
Yeah, so they got to Mirza al-Kabir, and the British told them, get out of here. Because a few months before, Nazi Germany sank the Italian battleship Roma
Okay.
with a glide bomb, almost like a cruise bomb.
Okay.
And they didn't want them to be exposed to that.
Close to that. Yeah.
So again, it's kind of another working up phase, and also they had the first crossing the line. They went down to Bahia, Brazil,
So, yeah.
and we're just there for barely a day, and they were told, "Yep, you got to come back."
Oh, okay.
You know.
Yeah.
And so then they went up, refueled at Freetown, and then finally picked up President Roosevelt with the car and came back.
Okay.
There was a different set of people that came out and went back. It wasn't just all the same people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and there's all kinds of great documentation, diaries and deck logs, and I'm trying to pull all this together towards a book I want to write on at least Iowa's World War II history.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's another thing. Speaking of myths, and William and I talked about this, and I'm partially embarrassed too because I jumped on it. Well, as I mentioned, I've got all these the deck logs, the war diaries, and things like that. We'll come to find out, you know the story about the Porter. She accidentally launched a torpedo towards Iowa, and they increased speed, and they blew up in the wake. And yeah, Admiral King wanted, he was out to kill somebody. Well, President Roosevelt just said, listen, let's go on with the war. Basically, I don't want the publicity. So Porter was not ordered out of the task force group. They were with two other. Porter was with two other destroyers.
Oh,
They were, wait, 3 in total. Was there? Oh, okay.
16 ships with her, 4 destroyers, 4 destroyers, 4 destroyers.
But those were in relays.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I had 3 in their squadron. But either way, so they weren't ordered out. It was pretty much they went on with the war, and I got to double check this. The investigation took place on the ship. There wasn't when they got back to Bermuda, there wasn't some big arrest warrant going on. A lot of it was totally fabricated by this one author. And then when they talked about, too, they went on to the war. Oh, let me back up, too. Supposedly, when Porter was coming out to sea, she scraped the side of another destroyer. Well, it's not in anybody's deck logs. There's not one mention of it. And then supposedly they dropped the depth charge, I believe. And there's nothing mentioned there, too. And I'll send this out, too. I've been collecting all this information. A guy wrote a great article about all the baloney that came out about Porter.
And he launched a missile with a UFO too, right?
Yeah, and supposedly she went up to Alaska and somebody hit the firing mechanism of a 5-inch gun, and the shell went into the captain's rose garden, and his wife was having tea. It's all baloney.
It killed her.
Yeah.
Blown the house up.
Yeah, and the guy was explaining what it takes to shoot a 5-inch gun. So anyhow, all this stuff.
Now-
Don't shoot, we're Republicans. It was supposed to be a secret for 15 years.
It was.
Yeah.
Now, there was a case where a destroyer had been out firing off San Clemente and came into Long Beach. And this is like the late 50s, early 60s.
Uh-huh.
Was over during. And they were sitting at the pier and they had the mount train south.
Okay.
And the guy was in there doing well. When the captain said cease fire, they ceased firing. And the one mount, they were loaded.
Oh, okay.
And when they were doing work in the mount, they fired both rounds and they landed down off Huntington Beach.
All right. Well, anyhow,
Landgraf was there when that happened.
Okay. Wow. I'll shoot out some things that I've been collecting on this. And the more I get into it, the more I'm just appalled at how this story's been.
So what is the true story of the port?
She accidentally fired a torpedo, and Captain McCrae on the bridge sent out a message to all the escorting ships, for future reference, do not use Iowa as a target. And that's in the book on McCrae. So anyhow, just as an illustrative piece, I dug up this photograph.
Wrong class.
I can't find a picture though.
We're not here to rivet
that was,
count.
yeah.
Not
but
here to rivet count.
if I could find one, I'd replace it with this. Anyhow, to give people an idea. So yeah, you're right. You're right. I know that one. Then, for whatever reason, she was in a picket line off Okinawa, radar picket line to give warning of incoming attacking Japanese planes. And here's another thing too. She either shot down a plane and it crashed right next to her hull and exploded underneath there and broke her back, or the plane just, I don't know. There's some confusion. I got to go through that one. But they had several photographs that they managed to take. Crew got off, and there she goes. That was it.
And nobody got injured.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the Iowa. We had conflicting stories about, was there one elevator? Was there two elevators? Were they inside? Were they outside? I couldn't find any photographs. So back in 2014, I was at the National Archives. I found this photograph, and it was in a Bureau of Air envelope. So I think one of the patrolling either blimps or Catalina flying blimps or something picked it up. But you can see, here's the elevators. And this is, of course, where his little canvas awning and the veranda was. And I'm pretty sure, this to me makes logical sense. The large elevator on the main deck, had a ramp. You'd come out to his O1 level, and then it could go up to the O2 level. From there, you would go, to the different meetings in the flag officers area, the conference room, things like that. In case of combat, you would go to the smaller elevator, I believe, and go up to the O3 level, where he could go inside the armored conning tower for protection. And remember, Iowa was only one of the 4 ships that had an armored section all the way down to O3. All the others, it was just in O4 and O5. So I haven't seen that documented, but to me, it just seems to be, or maybe it is, I can't remember, logical that it would work that way. So, and then my French warship author friend confirmed that this is a GMDR, and this is an American cargo ship, and they were unloading 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters to put on the ship, and it was the same time period. So that confirmed that it was Mir's El Kabir. So I was like, score, I was really thrilled about that. And I just sent this to the Naval Institute. They're working on a small project. So anyhow, here's a close-up. Now, I would like to say this is President Roosevelt getting lowered down, but I really don't know. And maybe that's why the picture was taken. I'm speculating,
No, not on a boat.
So that, so I'm making that comment about it.
And the Mills Air Kabir, it was done with a boat.
Yeah, that's
He?
right.
When he left the ship,
Oh, no. Miles was asking if they were painting the side of the ship. I said they want to use a
I
boat.
couldn't tell it was a boat
Yeah,
from here.
yeah.
So anyhow, I just loved when we got that photograph. And when I first got it, it took me so long to process everything I brought home. And then all of a sudden I realized one day I was like, oh my goodness, there it is, the smoking gun.
Yeah.
And of course, Roosevelt, his war cabinet staff, the chief of staffs, went on to the Tehran conference with Stalin and Churchill, and then there was 2 Cairo conferences in November 22nd and 4th. They did actually a lot of traveling during that journey overseas. It's really amazing, both land and air. So, and Churchill doesn't seem happy. Stalin,
Never seen
yeah, Stalin wanted to have the second front, and he was kind of like the tiebreaker, because Churchill wanted to go through the soft underbelly, he called it, of Europe, and America wanted the most direct route into France. And Stalin didn't really believe that anybody was going to do anything. He said, "You make sure, I won't believe you until you assign a supreme Allied commander." So that's when they picked up Eisenhower within a few weeks, I guess. So there's only a handful of pictures. I still think there's more out there. This is Roosevelt giving a farewell speech. Here's Captain McRae, Executive Officer Casey, Admiral Leahy. Here's one of the Secret Service people here. Dick Tracy's over here, right? Kind of hard to see, but he's giving the farewell speech.
That's quote one.
What's that?
That's quote one.
No, that's 3. That's right.
That's quote 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
But
right.
look at the elevation. That's
So
over
see-
45.
See this ramp right here, and then you got the stage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Those are the 20s that go around the Cub goes
Right.
around over where the ship store is now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, the 20 closest to you, you'll see that if you go inside where the elevator is, you can see the weld scars on the deck where the 20 is mounted.
That's not so much fun on Iowa. I think it's the mixture of 40s and 80s. It's fascinating.
The lowest, the doghouse, the little house they put back there was a movie projection booth originally.
Yeah.
The gun tub is part of it.
Oh.
They didn't cut it off all the way. They cut it the width they needed and welded everything to it.
So again, here's a close up. And so you see Roosevelt's looking pretty haggard. There's one book that came out, and Roosevelt used to be Assistant Secretary to the Navy. He had a gigantic love affair with Navy and ships. And this one guy documented over 116 ships he had traveled on, and he didn't think he'd capture them all. And there's like 16 transatlantic liners and 6 battleships and 5 cruisers and blah blah
Did
blah.
you travel with Queen Mary?
No, that would have been. She didn't have her first voyage till 36.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, probably not.
I think he was using Indianapolis about that time.
Yeah, and also, later on, the Quincy. Yeah, he was on a lot of ships. Here's one of my favorite pictures. This is when she wore, it's called Measure 32-1B. The whole camouflage topic you can go psycho over. There's so much in that topic. But this is a picture of her supporting the fast carrier task force air groups.
They had gone to sea because there's a report the Japanese fleet was out. They were painting the camouflage on the Iowa, and they literally dumped the paint. They were the guys down below painting.
Yeah.
Paint got dumped. They pulled them up. They were already making up steam, and the fleet
Take
sailed.
off. Cool.
There's a great set of pictures of her leaving, I think, Majuro.
Huh. National Archive identification ones. So the one and only time they were in a suite, the truck lagoon.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the attack was from air power. Most of the Japanese ships escaped. A lot of them did anyhow. And then one that was lagging behind. This was actually a training cruiser, the Katori. She already apparently had damage from probably a plane attack or things that one. Between Iowa and New Jersey, they wound up with some long-range gunning to sink her. And this is one of the pictures from Iowa.
I think there's a passage on Operation Hailstone from Ian Toll's recent Pacific trilogy.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's in his second book,
Okay.
which covers Hailstone.
Okay.
And he talks about the air attack in more detail and mentions some stuff.
Oh,
with
okay.
Victoria. So if you want to look up some more stuff, there's probably some more info there.
The other thing that's really amazing in the war diaries, they record how many shells were fired. And this is from that. 59 to 16 inch high capacity, 129 5-inch shells. So there's a picture of Victoria. And of course, here's another one. I wrote an article about this on the old broadside crew newspaper we used to send out. Another myth thing, and it's even in the war diaries too. This hit on turret 2 from Marshall Islands, the Millie Atoll. was from a 6-inch gun that they did not anticipate was on Millie Atoll. And then the hit to the porthole side was either a 5 or 5.5 inch. But everybody always talks about the 4.7 inch guns. And there was this myth that at Singapore, when Japan captured Singapore, they grabbed all the British 4.7 inch guns and took them all over the South Pacific. And every time somebody got hit, oh, it's those damn British 4.7 inch guns. Well, there's all kinds of documentation that has no 4.7 inch guns on Millie Atoll that I came up with. So, and then the actual write-up of iOS says it was 6-inch gun. So here's the big splat, and today we just have that handprint guy. So up above is that circle. Well, the Iowa crew in the 80s, they had an arrow to that, and I was like, no, that's not it. Well, yeah, but it looks, and I'm like, no, that's not. So, the chief or whoever did it said, well, that's our story, and we're sticking to it, type routine, So I was like, whatever.
Damn
And
chiefs.
I know. So I've got some other pictures too, the damage to the deck, things like that.
It injured 2 people, right? Did it injure?
Very minor.
Oh.
Yeah. I think some glass and the pointer trainer nodules that stick out there.
There's a gouge in the bottom of the hood over the pointer.
Okay. Yeah, I do have some other pictures though that shows damage. But just think, it hit one of the most armored areas on the ship. Way to go, guys.
Yeah.
You know.
Never do.
Here's one of my favorite pictures, and again, the decks would have been painted like the model we have back at our museum. And another interesting thing, and this was shocking, in the original 1938 design, this is what they were going to carry for air protection. It's like, you've got to be joking, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And this is what we wound up, and I think, well, I've said that it was the largest, along with the Essex class carriers, the number of anti-aircraft units.
Now, could
Not that big a deal, I don't believe.
uh,
So, and of course, float planes, there was 2 catapults. They would carry another third plane on a dolly. These were Vought Kingfishers. These were fired not by steam, but by like a 5-inch gun.
It's a 5-inch casing about
Casing,
that.
right,
I got
right.
3 of them.
Right. Okay. Oh, cool. So anyhow, the era of float planes lasted from 1924 to 1949, and their mission was taken over in the Korean War and then in the 80s by the helicopters. But they would, go out for reconnaissance, radio relay. They would spot the fall of the shells for correction and aiming. They could rescue downed aviators. There was a love-hate relationship with them because if you were in nighttime combat, if you got hit with a shell, the aviation gas would go to town, and you'd be, sitting there as a real visible target. So if they knew they were going to go into battle, they would fly them off either to another ship or maybe some atoll or something like that.
Or
Sometimes.
they would jettison.
Okay, yeah. So there were other.
Savo Island was the big lesson on that
Oh,
because the
yeah.
cruisers, they hit the float planes right amidships and they started burning in the hangar and everything.
So some of the battleships, they would have their catapults on top of the turrets, and then also the cruisers would have their catapults running side to side with our ships. But that was very common for many years, the float planes. And here, the story about the ship lightens by 15 tons. If you take the weight of the powder and the 9 armor-piercing shells weight, that's what you come up with. And again, I was pointing out here that would normally be airbrushed out.
Interesting.
Now, this was the crest for both World War II and the Korean War. And this is in MathWebs actually, the article I wrote ended up getting posted in there somehow. I took an Excel spreadsheet, I grabbed all the aviation action reports, and I came up with 18 attacks that Iowa opened fire. So she had 5 planes shot down, 3 planes assisted kill, and 3 planes they damaged. Now that might seem really low, but remember you're in a carrier cap
Screen,
air protection,
screen, right.
aircraft carriers. Plus, also from what I've read, the Japanese, they would peel off from the battleships and try to go after a carrier or a destroyer, and they were trying to attack from the stern because they thought that was the lightest defended area of the ship. And this is a really cool photograph I found too. This is one day where they did shoot down 3 planes, and this was taken from another ship, and this is one of the planes they shot down. So I thought that was an incredible photograph. It's on the Philippines. And also during that same day, Iowa shot a plane, and it flipped over, and then Intrepid was already on fire, and then the second plane hit. This is photograph from Iowa. This was a big attack that day. And so it was nothing to laugh about getting hit by a compost. So then, about Typhoon Cobra or Halsey's Typhoon. Iowa got stuck in that. Their fleet lost 3 destroyers, about 790 crew members. Iowa lost 1 float plane, 2 boats, life rafts, had up to 25-degree rolls, if you can imagine. And what that did was first sent her back to floating dry dock at Sealer Harbor. And this was for the strut bearings failure in the number 3 propeller shaft. And there's some great pictures of people standing down here. A lot of pictures from this. That's December of '44.
So you can actually see
the ship.
when you propeller it's on the skeg there, you can see it's down.
Oh, wow. So all the way back to Hunters Point, San Francisco. This time they did airbrush out the radar, I think. And this is, again, at Hunters Point while they're working on it. That's January of '45.
But they ever removed
I
it?
think the radar was removed because they switched from the SK1 to the SK2 at that time.
Okay, all right.
No,
So
they just.
that assumption on my part. Okay,
No,
that
They
makes
removed
sense.
them all for
Yeah.
overhauling there.
Here's another picture when she went back to Pacific. There was 2 different occasions where they shelled mainland Japan, and they would run in early in the morning with several different battleships and fire into these war production facilities. And this is a newspaper wire photo, and you can see them firing into Japan. So I thought that was pretty cool. And this came, believe it or not, from the Des Moines paper. Japan shelled for a second day. Fleet's planes draw no opposition because they were holding back for saving their weapons for the invasion. I thought was going to take place.
Yeah.
And then finally, when the war was over, Missouri led Iowa. Here's Iowa. They got the big war victory flags up here with 2 other destroyers into Saigami Bay, Tokyo Harbor, for the surrender of the naval base in Japan, and also eventually for the surrender ceremony. Here's pictures, sunset with Mount Fuji in the background, August of '45. Now, I haven't been able to find a photograph that shows Iowa right next to Missouri. This is taken from Missouri. This is Iowa in the background. These are all the ship's boats delivering the VIPs for the Japanese surrender ceremony. Iowa had communication gear on board that the other warships didn't, like wire photo, radio photos, things like that. And this one I discovered, so in World War II, in the Korean War, the ship's nickname was not the Big Stick, it was the Mighty Eye. Now, how or why that got changed, because, New Jersey's Big J stayed that way, Missouri, Mighty Mo, Wisconsin, the whiskey, they all stayed the same during all the commissioning periods. Somewhere, somehow, and I still haven't found it, but this was a souvenir card they gave the crew members. And of course, after the surrender ceremony, the massive flyover, kind of like in your face Japan.
Yeah.
Here's Missouri again.
Now, it was decommissioned in 1949? Did
Yeah.
It take part in the occupation of Japan?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I put some more stuff in for that top
Okay.
So-
Okay.
Getting there.
You know, it's kind of interesting that day when all the planes were flying over. Well, the 29s, they also flew over the palace.
Oh,
And Hirohito's wife was there, and she had commented how beautiful the B-29 was.
ouch. So, for whatever reason, Iowa didn't come out with a cruise book, with a hardbound like some of the other warships did. They did have, we have several of these who've been donated, this softbound book. And their little logo was Brooklyn to Tokyo in 3 years, the Mighty Eye. And they had about 190,000 miles in 3 years of war that they steamed, and 9 battle stars from World War II.
That's funny. Only the Iowa and the South Dakota did not do a cruise book.
That's so weird.
It was the captains.
So I didn't go into a lot of detail. I don't know if that's something somebody else wants to do. These are the different listings of the battle star or ribbons. They call them occupations or operations, things like that. Now, while she was in dry docks, she missed these 2 operations, but New Jersey was still out there, so New Jersey picked up 2 more battle stars. But those are basically, yeah. Now, I put this together as a kill board just for fun. And there's 3 shore bombardments. And then you got the Katora sinking. Here's the Japanese mainland, the Mighty Eye. And then I couldn't do a half plane. And here's the 3 assistant kills and the 5 kills here. In the logo, I tried to get this crest made by, the crest folks in the gift shop. Nah, not like that.
Oh.
Unless you want to pay for it yourself.
James has actually
Uh-huh.
the plaque with that.
Flat.
About that thick.
Really?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I don't know why we haven't made a mold of it yet.
Huh. You mean of their kill board?
No, but
Which
Oh, it's
James?
This right here.
yeah, it's about this
Yeah.
big around. Not
Okay.
that
It
big.
did.
Probably
Right.
store
It's
James.
about that big around.
Yeah.
About that thick, but it's all really it's carved.
Cool. I actually
Which
have,
James?
James
James
Musal.
Oh.
He was one of the
Sorry.
founders. Something like that.
Yeah, James was one of the founders.
I better quit it.
Yeah.
So
I
here-
sold it on eBay.
So here we go at the end of the war.
Got
We-
$2 for it.
From that first Pearl Harbor chart I said. We had added the 4 South Dakota class, the 4 Iowas, although, there was 2 others authorized but not completed, and I'll tell you that story in a second. And then what was supposed to be the follow-on class, the Montana class, and I'll mention that in a moment too. So at the end of the war, we had 23 battleships in service, but not for long.
Yeah.
So now part of the also initial occupation forces, our Marines, some of our sailors, and from other warships went in and accepted the surrender from the Japanese battleship Nagato. She was the only Japanese battleship still afloat, although she did have a lot of bomb damage. Well, I've got some other really great photographs of that.
There's the one in the Iowa Veterans Association, the Japanese flag.
That's an admiral's flag, and it came
Yeah.
off Nagato.
Yeah.
Sure enough. And then we have a chair locked up right next to me that came from the officers.
What's the blue arrow?
Bomb damage. Just signifying
A
that.
blue arrow.
Yeah.
Well, a bomb hit the top of turret 2 and went off. If you look at the bridge, notice
Yeah.
all the window frames are kinked.
Iowa, it was authorized Illinois, 22% complete, and they scrapped her in September of '58. And all welded construction, saving weight, increased strength. And you can see the different fire rooms, engine rooms along here in the bow. Then the saga of the Kentucky, she was 73% complete. They spent $55 million. She ended up being sold for scrap. You can see like the 5-inch gun mount turrets, all kinds of goodies here, and the bow. So Wisconsin in '56 rammed the Eaton, and Kentucky's bow was used to rebuild her, and then the joke was she was called Kentucky. And here's the damage tweet.
Of course, the whole top area of the bow is still Wisconsin today.
Oh, okay.
Everything
so
above the set,
there or there.
you can see where the seam is right at the top of the damage.
Okay.
Okay, they cut it off back about into the fore.
Okay.
They cut that section off and it set it on the pier.
Right.
The deck was folded like taffy, just diagonally across under the anchor chains. They replaced that, but they reinstalled that bow.
Here's a bow being taken off the Kentucky and taken over to the Wisconsin.
Right.
So during that long phase when Kentucky was just sitting there, they were talking about making her into a missile battleship. She might even be in an armored oiler, et cetera, et cetera. But then she was struck from the Navy's list in '58. Her engines were used for the fast support combat ship Sacramento and Camden. And this was the Montana class, the follow-on. She resorted back to the traditional American battleships that were slower, that had greater armor, of course, big guns.
Oh.
And they had 4 turrets here. She couldn't go through the Panama Canal, and 6 knots slower. But after the Battle of Midway, they just didn't feel like they needed any more battleships. So they never ever came out.
I thought they were canceled March 1st of '43.
I'll have to go double check. I don't know. That's what I picked up. So I put this together the other day, and once Iowa came back after 3 years of war, you can see she did go back to Japan as a 5th Fleet flagship for the occupation forces. Overall at Bremerton, her home port was Long Beach. They would do exercises. This is in '47. You know, with midshipman officers, different training. Another overall here in 1948. This is just traditional peacetime activities. And this is really interesting. They took the Nevada that was very radioactively hot,
Oh, yeah.
took her off Hawaii, and there's a great write-up in the cruise newspapers. And it talks about sinking the Nevada. And she hung on for a long time. They finally had to sink her, I think, with an aircraft torpedo. But that was one of her duties to do that out of Pearl Harbor.
Is that the Bikini Atoll?
Was
Yeah,
was there a record of how many shells she fired at Nevada?
I'm pretty sure I've got that somewhere.
I think there's in the book on Nevada, Silver State Dreadnoughts. I think they mentioned.
Really?
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's near the end of the book.
In fact, I think there's a photo and you can see the torpedo tracks heading towards the Nevada.
Yeah.
So this is 48. They were ordered inactive at the San Francisco Naval Shipyard. They had one open house left for what they called Navy Days, and then decommissioned, placed in reserve, but came out 2 years and 4 months later for the Korean War. And that's when here's her going off to Japan, 46, 47. Here's the Iowa newspaper that started in 46. We've gotten most of these. We have a lot of menus that are pretty cool. And of course, you know the Vicky story. We've got all her write-ups. Wish I had her uniform. That would have been great. Yeah.
I need to
Yeah,
smoke
with
this
the
up.
red chevrons. Damn it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think you guys know most of the Vicky
Hey.
stories.
Why don't you just go back
So-
and paint
I'm going to when I
Here's-
retire.
Here's you know, he wore the officer or master
Master
of
of
arms
Arms,
badges, and of course you know the number was 9, K9, and then the rating was the fire plug.
A
Rating?
fire plug.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Mhm.
That's what I meant.
What was the rating?
Fire plug.
Fire plug. It's a fire plug.
It's FP.
That's what this is. That's a fire plug.
I hadn't noticed that.
It was an FP1.
And then she had all the ribbons and everything. She was on board the ship the entire time.
And her chevrons were red.
Now, oh yeah, that's right. Now, there's also some goofy stories I've heard, and I just don't believe it. Like they were coming into Long Beach, and Vicky was barking at some sea lions out in the ocean. Supposedly jumped into the water. The ship had to pull over. I've
Nah.
never been able to confirm that. I think it's more baloney.
First of all, the ship wouldn't have pulled over.
I'm just gonna say, pull over on an 878-foot long.
No,
boat.
we serve her for
Yeah.
lunch over at
Yeah,
Vicky's.
yeah. Did
So
you turn
here's-
on the left directional too?
So here's some more memorabilia from the ship, and she would be in E. Shouldn't say she.
When did he leave the ship?
I'm sorry.
When did he leave the ship?
Did I put? I didn't put in a photograph. It's during '48. Yeah, and he wound up going back to Captain McCrae, who was a destroyer squadron commander, and then Captain Quigley, that was a gunnery officer, and also the Exxon Iowa, kind of took charge of him.
I get asked this the whole time.
Yeah.
Did Vicky die in World War II?
Well, yeah, I know. Yeah. It's
She's dead.
You know, it's like these little kids, like,
Little
oh
kids.
no, he retired to New York. That's what I always.
Probably died about 1952.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing.
There's a decommissioning ceremony, a program, and then there was a news article. They said during this '49 it was $25,000 a day to operate the ship. I guess that's correct. I just did inflation, so there would be 330,000 in 2024. You start adding that up, it gets to how much it costs today to operate ships, big major ships. So it's kind of shocking.
Considering the fact back then they had 2,700 roughly at $25,000 a day, and that included crew cost.
Right.
When you cut the crew by half, it's not going to be that much.
So I finally documented this because I just go nuts with everybody that bombards me with these messes I call them. Now, as far as I know, the ship does not move when she fires her 16-inch guns. It might be a millimeter, it might be an inch or two, but there's nothing dramatic going on. During the Vietnam War, Captain Snyder did the whole math breakout. I wish I could find it. I don't have that math knowledge, but he calculated that. Definitely, Iowa did not. It was not the only warship that had a bathtub installed here, and everybody was going, "Oh, well, we can say the only bathtub installed for the president." Well, the Quincy had one installed, and I think there's a couple more for the president. Was
New Jersey had a bathtub for a short time too.
okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah.
Vietnam, she had a tub and it was removed, but it wasn't built in like.
Right.
It's just one of those.
Yeah, even the pictures up there. In fact, you and I looked at deck drawings and everything else.
Yeah.
Those were clawfoot.
Great presentation on this, and actually had a naval architect. The barbette or the turrets don't necessarily fall out of the barbettes if the ship was to sink. There's actually some real strong clips holding the upper turret structure in place for firing. And I think everybody got hung up on the famous picture of Bismarck sitting down in the ocean, and all the gun turrets are off, and you just see that hole of the barbette. And so this is it, unless there's some damage, with interior explosions or pressures to pop it out. And another great example is this. With this was in Scapa Flow, where the German World War I fleet was scuttled. Some of the ships flipped turtle, and the turrets, when they were, or the ships, when they were finally pulled back to England to be scrapped, their turrets were still upside down in the barbettes. So, and then the one thing that I've already talked about, the battleships were designed just to escort fast attack aircraft carriers in World War II. They wound up doing that job very well, and also I point out to people that they really perform the role of a tender, because you're refueling other ships with your massive oil capability. You've got foodstuffs you normally would share. You've got 26-bed hospital. You've got the dental facility. You've got a machine shop. So they're almost like a floating tender. So there's a lot of great capabilities. However, they're very expensive to operate and hard to justify in that peacetime. So that's the World War I phase. Now the rest of this goes really fast, so don't panic.
Can we just take a short break?
Oh,
there,
yeah.
Dan?
Okay. So, hello everyone. You obviously know who I am. I won't bore you with that. So, After Dave Way's awesome presentation, I really don't have much to add as far as history is concerned. Especially because half the stuff in this outline that I've passed around is probably wrong anyway. What I've tried to do with the outline in general is give a brief summary, very brief, by bullet point, of the most critical information that we should be covering, that I think we should be covering on the tour. Of course, you're free to disagree with me. And also highlight some extra information that can help fill out a topic, but isn't necessary to actually cover on the tour unless somebody asks about it. There are also some stuff of medium importance that can help fill out a tour, so that way you're not saying one line at each station and then moving on, which I don't think is a problem for any of us, to be honest, but it helps a little bit. A couple things I wanted to highlight here on this sheet. Yellow highlights are the topics, the major topics that should probably be covered during a tour. Red is the critical information for the topic. Let me try turning that off actually. So, a little louder. There you go. And then black is sort of medium. Feel free to include that, but up to you really. Also, something I always, is something that's, especially they're doing now in schools as far as teaching history is concerned, and it's something that I personally agree with, which is kind of rare actually these days, is that dates, specific dates, are not that important. Critical dates, say December 7th, 1941, that add context to an event, you can include those. But don't go around telling people like on March 12th, 1943, somebody took a crap in the port side. You know. Nobody cares. They don't. Especially for the groups that we're dealing with. So that's the major. That's the major thing I wanted to add on to all this. Something I was telling a couple of folks before we started. Something I want to reiterate is that whenever we're giving these history tours, obviously every single group is going to be different. Every single group is going to have different reactions to the way that you're presenting, what you're presenting, etc. But what I like to do, it works sometimes very well, and other times I don't get any response, so that's always fun. But something I always try and do with these groups as we bring them in is give them the option to learn about the sorts of things that they want to learn about. So I always say, look, I can talk here for a week, but that's never going to be fun for anybody. So what are the sorts of things that you want to learn about so that I can guide the tour, the overall tour, into things that you may find interesting, but also learn some things you may not have known. And usually I find that if they do respond well to that, or if they do respond at all, and ask questions and so on and actually engage with me, we usually have a pretty good time on the tour. Even if it goes a little longer than normal because I'm answering questions a lot more. Set here to the switch. I always tell these groups that we have 80 plus years of history here and many more bits of contextual history. There's no way we're going to be able to get through it in an hour and a half. There just isn't. As it is, I've already sent out an email to Tiffany, and because she sent out an email recently saying that some of the tours are getting a little long. And well, yeah, some of us, myself included especially, do tend to go a little longer on my tour. There's also a bit of tension there where an hour and a half is really designed, I feel is really designed for if people are just coming aboard the ship and doing a self-guided tour. They're going around, they're maybe reading a couple of signs, they're walking past stuff, but they're not really stopping anywhere. Or at least not for any great length of time with a couple of exceptions. For us, we're stopping at almost every single point on the tour and talking for 4 or 5 minutes at the very minimum. And so that's going to add up, especially if we're to bring them down to the second deck here and take them down to the enlisted mess deck. there's no way in hell that you're going to be able to stop at almost every station, talk for 4 or 5 minutes, if not longer, and still get down here within that hour and a half. At the very most, you're probably going to get to the Seaways, in my experience, or probably even the aft missile deck. Beyond that, good luck. You're probably running down to about the last 5 minutes on your tour. So personally, I think we should probably extend it to at least 2 hours. I think that will give us a little bit more buffer room. I think anything more than that is probably asking a bit too much from people. 2 hours seems to be about the limit for most people, at least in my experience.
You know, just real quickly, Miles, I agree with you on that. I'll just have to talk to Catherine to see if she can actually let the tour groups know.
Yeah.
And also, I think it might be beneficial, besides asking the tours, the people that are there, guests, what do you want to know? You might want to talk to the person in charge and say, just to let you know, we might go to 2 hours maximum.
Yeah.
I don't want you to go any further. Now, Jake, on the other hand, you go through it pretty damn quick.
Yeah, you're pretty quick.
Yeah. I know.
You have the opposite problem.
Yeah, so
It's not a bad one, I should say.
I would like to touch bases with you and see what you do as a tour. And I might actually, to be honest with you guys, as your quote-unquote temporary manager, I would like to see how you do the thing that you do, how you do the history tour. For Miles, for William, for Jake, I like not to evaluate, but just to see what is it that you touch upon, what is it that you speak about. For Dale, Damas, James, and I, we don't do history tours, if at all. I haven't done a history tour at all, to be honest with you, except for that one time that I stepped in briefly. But I like to see what you all do, and just to get an idea of what are some things that we should talk about, what are some things we shouldn't talk about, and then maybe evaluate what you do at the end.
Yeah, William.
I've found that when we do a tour, history tour, like we have older kids in that,
Yeah.
you're asking a lot of questions.
Yes.
That takes time. If we have younger ones, we're not getting the questions so much, but the ladders are taking a long time.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
nothing we can do about that safely.
No.
Right.
And that right there is going to take up to 2 hours right there.
Yeah, and that's assuming you do much of any talking at all.
Right.
And simply moving around the ship is going to take a while. But that touches on another thing that I wanted to get into, is the difference between lower, like elementary school, middle school, and high school, or even we've had college groups occasionally, or ROTCs. Obviously, as we all know, these are going to be very different experiences across the board. I don't have to reiterate that. The little kids, especially, I think that hour and a half makes a lot more sense for them, because you're going to be doing less talking, more walking during that tour. I mean, you're going to be stopping at places, sure, and talking for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, pointing out what it is so that they know what they're looking at.
And they'll be taking more pictures as well.
Yeah, and they're going to be taking pictures, and make sure we have to just make sure we give them every opportunity to take as many photos as they can, because this is going to be something they're going to be looking back on, probably many years down the line. So we want to be able to we want to give the opportunity for people to have those memories. The one that I always make sure I get, and I'm sure everybody else sort of does too, is getting pictures in front of the big guns and on the bow. At the very least, even on the overnights, if I start in a disadvantageous position on the tour route, at the very least, the last thing I do is I always take them up to the big guns to at least get a picture. Even on the overnights, and especially history tours. Yeah.
Something to kind of change that, the morning group takes them up there anyway.
Yeah.
They take a picture up there before they leave, no matter what. That is, at least when I was doing mornings, it was breakfast, guns, and then whatever they may have missed on the tour the night before, as long as it was on the general tour.
Well, I'll put an amendment on that one, because Tiffany has instructed me to, whoever's doing that morning tour, they need to be off the ship by 0930. So
Okay.
we had a group, I had a group that last time I was lead that did not go up to the bridge. I don't know how that happened, but they didn't go up to the bridge. And so that Sunday morning, I took them up there. Now, I was very cautious, making sure that the last person went by, I chained. And then when we left coming back down, the last person out, I chained. And even though Della, who was doing the tour route, she was checking chains and making sure. But then even when I got to VJ, he was telling me, "Oh, just to let you know, we don't do tours anymore." Oh, okay, very well. So if you can, try to complete the tour on that quote unquote Saturday evening overnight. Because if you don't, you just have to say, "I'm sorry, but we won't be able to get there on Sunday," because most of the times VJ has told me, and he knows me, I know him, most of the time we forget to put the chains back up. And so that way, Della, she was running, and then Don C, just as I was talking to VJ and finished talking to him, he went up there to go check all the chains. And I said, okay, well, you guys just did this twice, you don't need to do it twice. Anyways, let's go back to the history tour.
Yeah. Well, speaking of chains too, on the history tour, the rule of thumb is don't put down any chains to go into places. Like if it's chained off, just move on. So that includes, say, the big one is the captain's import cabin, and I highlighted that on here. That on the history tour, we do not go in there. It just creates more work for VJ if we forget to put it back up, and then it creates confusion as people start wandering around in there and to take stuff. But you guys will know that. So, as I said, with this outline, it's mostly just overall topics that we'd like to cover on the history tour, and some crucial information there, along with some filler information to fill out a specific topic if that's what people tend to be interested in.
So this is pretty much like Miles, like a cheat sheet that you.
Yeah, sort of a
developed
cheat
for us.
sheet for the ship's service career. It's very, very truncated, and there's definitely errors in this. The book that I had, I noticed plenty of errors in it myself. When I was looking through, there was a bunch of pictures that were labeled wrong and a bunch of descriptions that are clearly out of date. But that's the problem. That's the problem with studying history like this, and Dave sort of alluded to this. History is what we call a living document. It's constantly evolving. Our understanding of it is constantly evolving. So Dave is finding things on a daily basis that we thought were true that turned out to be completely false, or very different from what was written about it later. So it's just important that we keep, especially if we're going to be teaching more history-focused tours, that we stay on top of that. And maybe we talk to Dave Way about getting some sort of, newsletter from him that will list new things that he's finding that might pertain to what we're doing. Yeah.
He sends me emails.
Yeah, I get them too, but I mean, a lot of those emails are like, naval news and stuff like that, which is fine. I appreciate it. I like that. But if we had like all of them all of the changes like in one place, maybe like in a spreadsheet or something, something that we can reference that might be worth considering. I don't know exactly how we would do that, but.
Well, you would just have him set it up and let us have access to it.
Right, that's what I mean.
That's, that instead of.
It just depends on how much time he has to update that sort of thing.
Well, even that list, that timeline list that he showed us at the end of World War II and of course of the Korean War, Cold War, I think that was kind of beneficial seeing that, and I'd like to get
That
a
could
copy
be
of
your
it.
history lesson.
Yeah, that could be right there. Yeah,
That's your
absolutely.
history tour
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
That timeline. And that's what you follow.
Right. Obviously, certain parts of our tour route are going to be more history focused than others. I actually like to consider the history tour more of a STEAM tour, more of a STEM tour in many ways, with an H added on somewhere in there. I don't know how that would work, but the history part of it is sort of all around us and sort of baked in as we're walking around, but a lot of the general tour itself is built around technology, physics, sciences, that sort of thing, mathematics in many cases. So what I always try and do is if I'm going to talk about something like that, I try to incorporate it and link it to a specific event or example, so that way they're not just getting the abstract, they're getting the practical application of that. So, for example, when we talk about, if any of you happen to talk about this, I tend to point out rangefinders when we're, especially during the overnights when I can use my laser to point them out up in the superstructure. I really like pointing out the rangefinders because they give an example of how we use trigonometry on a regular basis. And in this case, for a very specific application, but I always try and ask questions like, okay, the rangefinder's up at the top of the mast, the main mast there. Why is it up at the top of the main mast? Why isn't it down here? Well, the answer is that you can see farther over the horizon if you're farther up on the superstructure than you would be if you were down on the main deck. The farthest you can see up from sea level is about 13 miles. Whereas up there you can see out to almost 19. So big differences up there. And I try to emphasize that. And anytime I also give a figure, like say length of the ship, I always try to match that with a reference that they know. So if I say 887 feet long, great. Nobody knows how much 887 feet actually looks like unless it's standing right in front of them. And even when you're on the ship, it's hard to visualize that. So I always say something like, that's almost 3 NFL football fields at the end.
Yep.
Not quite there, but it's pretty close. So usually people can visualize, okay, I've seen a football field before, or even a soccer pitch, in many cases, because a lot of these kids are from LA. So that usually helps a lot. The 108 feet wide, usually I try to pair that with my tablet and show photos, which is why I carry this stupid thing around, especially with a sling. Because I've always found that a picture is worth 1,000 words and a video is worth 1,000,000. You can talk about something in theory all day, but unless they visually see something connected to what was just talked about, it's really hard for it to stick in anybody's minds. At least for me personally. I know that's how I am. That's why I always struggled with math, is that I could never quite attach the theory to the practical. Yes, Don, we understand.
You know, it's kind of strange that you mentioned the math part because, and trigonometry, because you mention that word to any student, they'll freak.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the Navy does train you on those mathematical concepts.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many times I've gone over the training of doing CPA, closest point of approach of a ship that's coming towards us.
Yeah.
And trying to figure that out mathematically on a moldboard. Which if I were to be given a moldboard today, I probably wouldn't know how to use it because it's been such a long time that I've actually used those things. But they actually train you as a gunner's mate to figure that out mathematically as well, yeah.
Right. And it depends on the group I'm dealing with. If it's like middle school students, I'll usually mention trigonometry, and that's if, I even point this thing out at all.
Higher math.
Yeah. And I always tell them, look, you don't have to remember that word. You don't even have to understand what it means right now, but you'll understand what it means later on. And that's assuming I even point it out in the first place. I don't always do. It just depends on the group.
Sure.
Trying to think, is there anything else I need to add?
When we get up to the secondary shells, can we hand them the shells?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
but
Yeah.
Hand the 5-inch.
you don't have the 5-inch.
Don't
Yeah.
get-
Yeah.
No, don't hand that
That goes
5-inch.
without saying.
Even the casing for the 5-inch round will be not a wise
20
decision.
millimeter got
The
stolen.
20, yeah, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
But the 40 millimeter, I normally just show that to them instead of passing it around because that takes up some time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometime.
Because the kids are going to
I
be
gave you
looking,
that
they're
20
going to
millimeter
be fighting
Oerlikon
over
round a
it.
while back. Do you
Yeah.
still have that hanging around?
Trying to find it.
Okay.
Because I took it over to the shop to make a mold and I had to do some turning with it and plate it. And I put it in a place and I got asked James where the heck it went.
Okay. Not that James.
No, James Musaw.
Yeah.
It's right here.
Yeah, so I mean, with regards to projectiles, yeah,
Well, I don't normally do it on the day tours. It was older kids, but a lot of times on the overnight tour, while I'm talking about, I'll take the 40 millimeter like
Yeah.
this, and I'll talk about how they would have to load the guns fast, and I would hand it to them. They would pass. I would keep in mind the sailor picking up those rounds and handing them up weighs 7 times more than what that one projectile weighs because there's no powder in it.
Right.
There's no clip.
Right. That projectile is not necessarily representative of how much it would actually weigh.
Correct.
But with the projectiles, I hand out the smaller stuff occasionally. It just depends on how much time I have and whether or not I think the kids can handle it. Some kids, like if they're going to get far too excited about that sort of thing, it's going to take more time for me to wrangle them back in and get the projectile back than it is for me to actually say what I want to say. So in that case, I don't bother, and in most cases, I don't bother. I don't even bother with the 5-inch round as far as trying to move it around. The very most, I'll hold on to the top of it and just dip it a little bit, but I'm nowhere to the point where I feel like I'm going to lose control.
Don't pick that up. Do
Yeah.
not pick up the
You're
5-inch
just asking
shell.
for trouble.
If you
Yeah.
do, that thing slips out of your hands. One, it's going to injure you. At the least, at the most, I will injure you. But more importantly, you're going to injure the kids, and
Yeah.
that will be the last time we talk to each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do not pick up that 5-inch round. Even the casing, I'll be very reluctant to show that off to them. I pick it up myself,
Yeah.
but I'm just holding it over my shoulder as I'm displaying it and showing it that it's empty. One, this is where the gunpowder is.
Yeah.
It's a solid. And I'll flip it around to the back end. Here's where the primer gets struck, and this solid turns into a gas, and I just put it back down, and that's it. But as far as passing that casing around, no, I don't even do that. No
Yeah.
way. No way.
No, I mean, the gun crew doesn't even do that.
Yeah,
And there
it-
is a specific way to handle that that casing.
Well, I came by many years ago, I think when I first started working here, and actually I tried carrying that 5-inch round, and it did slip out of my hands. And fortunately, it didn't hit me. I kind of caught it on my leg, it rolled off my leg, and then it rolled onto the deck. But I said to myself, okay, that's the last time I'm going to do that. Because if that thing rolled onto some kid's foot
Yeah.
or crashed onto his foot, that I wouldn't
That's a
do
first.
that.
That's a
Thing weighs
first.
90 pounds.
Yeah, yeah.
Thing damn shell weighs 90 pounds. Ouch.
Yeah. So that's just a flat no. I
Yeah.
just avoid that.
Yeah, that's all. Hard no.
Just asking for trouble. Trying to think.
Yeah, has anybody been asked? I just thought about this. How many people died on the ship?
Oh yeah, I've had that happen.
I haven't had that happen yet. And what do you say
have.
then?
I just basically give them the number from turret 2.
Yeah, that's what I do too.
Yeah.
That's it.
I say not during World War II, but we had an accident later, which we'll talk about, and then when I
Yeah,
get there.
right,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
We had 3 die in construction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Again, that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I feel for those guys who died during construction.
Well,
That sucks,
sure. No, it's not disrespectful, but is it something that they really need to know? No. Like DeMoss mentioned, the 47 that perished in Turret 2, that is necessary because that happened aboard the ship.
Right.
Okay?
And
And
the
we made a
reason-
memorial for it
And
too.
the reason you bring that up is because if nothing else is talked about Iowa, it is that accident.
Yeah. To the extent that Iowa is talked about at all in
Yeah.
public these days.
Yeah.
Which, says more about other things than anything else. But anyway.
Let's not go there.
Yeah.
Do you want to go outside, do a tour route outside, or?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be better. I mean, again, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, so you guys know most of this anyway. So.
But I think, like I said, I think it's essential that we do that so that.
As far as engaging aircraft, we can engage airliners when they're flying at their max cruising altitude. So, very, very powerful weapons. This is your primary means of shooting down aircraft from a distance. If this doesn't stop an enemy aircraft and they continue to keep coming, you move down caliber to what we call the 40mm Gophers. This is what the mounts look like. They were set up in what we call quad mounts. There were 4 guns per mount. We had 19 of the quad mounts. are spread around the ship.
And it floats.
Each one of these cannons, because they are automatic cannons, they are not machine guns. Automatic cannons are capable of firing about 120 to 144 rounds per minute out of each barrel. They would hold between, I think it's 4 and sometimes, I think I've seen an 8-round clip once, but that was a while ago. Only 4. They would have them in 4-round clips, and they would simply drop them into the top of the gun in order to load them, and that way they could keep up a continuous rate of fire. So, if that doesn't stop the bad guy airplane, he keeps coming. You move down to your last line of defense. This is the 20 millimeter Oerlikon. 20 millimeter Oerlikon is essentially a large machine gun. It's still technically a cannon because it's greater than 15 millimeters in caliber. Cannons start at 15 and go up from there. And they're about a third more powerful than a 50 caliber machine gun. Capable of engaging up to about 1.5 miles, 2 miles. So, if this doesn't stop the bad guy airplane, you're gonna have a real bad day. And then this is the point where I usually take questions from various folks and move on.
Okay, we're moving on to the forward part of the ship, way up to the forward part of the 16-inch guns.
The anchors, I mentioned how the anchor itself is not actually what holds the ship in place. It is the weight of the chain on top of it that holds the ship in place. And it's not going to stop the ship, it's just going to slow it down at the very best.
Used for driving.
Yeah. Beyond that, the anchors are not going to stop this ship at full speed. They just aren't.
Like Battleship?
Anchors. And usually if I'm talking about the anchors, I try and give a sense of scale here. A 15-ton anchor is not going to stop a 57,000-ton battleship, 58,000-ton battleship, moving at, 35 knots. It's just not. 35 knots is like, what, New Jersey? New Jersey was the fastest one?
Yeah, New Jersey,
33, 34 is probably more
You know what? That's
accurate.
confidential material. I don't think you need to explain that.
Yeah,
I might have
I
to
don't.
do something.
Not confident.
Hey,
I might have to do something
Chief,
now.
well, I forget his name. He comes here once a year.
It was the right
Yeah, I
way,
like
the
it
wrong way,
agree.
and the Navy way.
Yeah.
In the Air Force.
Did you get that on recording, him saying the Navy is weird?
With regards to the 16-inch guns, you guys know the statistics. I don't have to rehash those. As far as examples of how far it can fire, Catalina Island, I say Santa Monica Pier, but I've heard it can go farther than that.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Santa Monica Pier is not 25 miles away.
Right.
You know,
Disneyland?
Disneyland.
Disneyland,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
I also mentioned that it can hit the 405-5 interchange. It can hit Rose Hills. It can hit Dodger Stadium.
Yeah.
It can hit USC and barely hit UCLA. I actually did a Google Earth.
I actually stole that image.
Yeah, and I was able to actually figure that out. And I don't know why I don't have it here, but
I've got it on my tablet.
we should have it. Yeah, you have it on your tablet, but it's a pretty wide range. And if you fall anywhere within that circumference of that area there, you're going to get hit.
I need to find it again, but I found it was either myself or a friend of mine found a photo from a slide presentation showing the results of a gunnery exercise in the 80s overlaid on top of the Pentagon.
Ah,
And all the rounds are within the grounds of the Pentagon.
nice.
And you just know that some admiral was in there going, this is what we could do.
No, he was in there telling it wasn't quite as important.
If I do bring it up, I say it stopped in 1963.
Well, that's when they took it out of service and they dismantled them in the 70s.
Yeah, because in 1958, when the last of these ships was decommissioned,
Yeah.
they just sat in depots, but they had to be in special places and that.
Yeah.
So there are still a few of the shells left, but we never fired a live round.
There, I did actually find in some documentation on that projectile, they made that by simply taking the nuclear core from the Army's 8-inch nuclear projectile.
11-inch. The atomic cannon was an 11-inch. It was a Krupp 11-inch projectile.
The documentation I saw said it was from an 8-inch. They just took the core out and then they filled in the rest with explosives. Usually I'll start over here first, and I'll mention, okay, this is the projectile that this is an example of the projectile we fire. I always point out, hey, you notice that it's blue. Blue means that it's for training in some shape or form. Anytime you see a piece of ordnance in the U.S. military painted blue, it's for training, and usually it's inert in a vast majority of cases. The dummy round that's laying on its side there, that's practicing loading. I always try and quiz people, okay, how long do you think it's going to take to load one of those things? And of course, you get all sorts of answers. Occasionally I get the correct answer, which is 30 seconds. But usually I get all sorts of crazy ones. These two are for training, obviously. High capacity, talk about that. It's the ground big boom. It's like, what, 100-yard overkill radius?
Right, roughly.
The Mark 19 firecracker, I talk about this one a little bit. It does have a VT fuse on it, variable time fuse, but it's not for engaging aircraft, it's for engaging surface targets.
There's no such thing as a variable time.
Yeah, I know, it's a proximity fuse, but that's what the Navy calls proximity fuses. They call them VT. So it has a misnomer to fool people, which doesn't fool anybody anymore.
It fooled the sailor.
VT fuse in it, so that way a certain distance above the ground, the centrifugal force of the projectile, the plug on the back is blown off, and it distributes a small, or about 400 smaller grenades. It says these are bouncing Bettys. They're not.
No.
They are I think it's some M40 something or whatever. It's a grenade that when it leaves a canister, it has two wings that fold out. And that orients it in flight, so that's flying the right way when it hits the ground. When it hits the ground, it sets off a propellant charge, which pops basically an M67 fragmentation grenade to about waist height and detonates it. And it covers about 9 acres with those things. The Sabo rounds that they were developing, those were going to have what we call dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, which sometimes I talk about, and sometimes I don't. Those would have had a shaped charge in it, so they could punch through the top armor of tanks or armored vehicles. About 3 inches of penetration, which is all you need.
The 16-inch one?
It's with cluster munitions. Actually, generally, what you find is you need to saturate an area with dozens and dozens of the things in order to make it really, really unpleasant. Of course, I get all sorts of comments saying, "Oh, isn't it a war crime?" No, it's not. The U.S. military did not sign that treaty. Neither did Russia, Iran, or China. So, people who did, they lost a major capability. And yeah, as horrible as those things can be with unexploded ordnance.
Wait, what was it again?
Unexploded ordnance?
Unexploded ordnance.
Or UXO.
Okay.
As horrible as that can be for people living on the land after the fact, it's a major capability that you're giving up by doing that. And so the U.S. military never gave it up.
They found one in Japan.
I briefly talk about this. Not a ton, but briefly. I'll mention what it is, usually, so people know what they're looking at. I do mention this is the heavier of the two different types of projectiles. So 2,700 pound versus 1,900 pound over there.
Show them that.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll point this out right here. Sometimes I won't. Just depends on. I mention this, if only just to give them a sense of scale.
How far deep it goes?
Yeah, how far down it goes. The number that I give, whether or not it's accurate, I'm not sure, entirely certain, but the number I give for people as a point of reference is essentially they're standing on top of an 8-story building. It's about how far down it goes.
Well, 8 decks is the bottom of the hull.
Yeah.
We're standing, what, about right here, I think?
Yes.
Next to the breach. And average human mention what sometimes I'll mention what the different decks are for, and sometimes I won't. It just depends on the group. If they're really, really interested and they want to know, then I'll tell them a very, very brief summary of how they load the guns. But I always tell people, it takes me longer to explain it than for them to actually do it.
Yeah, because I just do it platform.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on from turret 1 and through the wardroom.
You asked a good question about whether or not I talk about all the pictures here. Most of the time I don't. But I will talk about them if somebody else is already doing a presentation of the map, just to, again, give them more time to finish up. But I don't go through every single picture. Like it takes so much time to do that, and people can look with their eyes.
I don't talk about these ones.
Yeah, I generally don't talk about those. I just mentioned that these are pictures of the Iowa throughout her service life, so you can see how the ship subtly changed over time.
Yeah.
Online
Actually, on that one, it shows I think it shows the 20s up at the front. Or it might.
40,
Yeah.
yeah, it would.
Yeah, so it's got the little 20mm mounts up there.
Yeah.
I do talk about this one though, because that pertains to this room as a whole. I introduce the officer's wardroom. The big thing I always try and make sure I do is explain the difference between officers and enlisted. Officers are the people who make the decision. The enlisted are the people who actually do the work.
Oh, it's easier than that. These guys eat on china, the other guys eat on aluminum.
No, we eat with our hands.
Well, also, they have silverware,
He's Air Force.
and the guys have metalware.
I had room service, guys.
I usually say you are all smart people for the sake of my sanity and your own. I'll just tell you how to read the map.
Well, yours is already questionable.
Yeah.
We don't even question yours anymore.
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah. For what little of it that there is left. So I just tell people white is World War II, yellow is Korea, red is Cold War. I'll point, or late Cold War. I'll point out that all of the troops' major combat actions took place in the Pacific. As far as I know, we never actually participated in any combat actions in the Atlantic.
No, strictly patrols, and her mission is to take him across exactly what all that entailed, why they did it, and then she comes back and she goes to the Pacific or she's going to the west of the And the little explosions are either she started it or ended it, one or the other.
For the most part, yeah. It's. Sometimes I'll mention the president here. Sometimes I won't. It just depends on the group and how much time I got.
Usually, the main thing that I mention here is her taking the ship taking the president across, which she did, and that was all shakedown and workup. She did training and exercises the entire time.
But that is history. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Sure. That is, if nothing else, that mission should be talked about.
Okay.
If people are curious, I've had this question come up of what did she do in the Pacific because of all the explosions there, and then I will give a very brief, like 3-minute synopsis of the Pacific War and how and where she took part. I actually have a better idea now that I actually did all this reading, but I essentially give the 3-minute summary of Japanese take all of this territory after Pearl Harbor, and then over the next 3 years we pushed them back through various island campaigns. And by the end of the war, the Japanese are so weak that Iowa is literally sitting off the coast bombarding Japanese factories.
And there was no response.
And heck, I start to wonder if those factories were even making anything at that point.
They were.
Barely.
Yeah. Mitsubishi.
Now, this picture here is clearer than the one Dave showed us.
Well, it's also much smaller, so the resolution is higher. I always try and point out the battle damage. Again, people want to know, like, hey, did this ship ever get hit? Yeah, it did. Point out the battle damage there. And I tell them that we got hit twice. The second hit on the hull didn't really do much in the way of damage. Although apparently, from what I read, it was like a 4-foot hole or something like that was blasted in the side. I think it said frame 134 or something.
Frame 134, below main deck.
I'm up high. I don't have to worry about it.
But again, I don't go into that much detail. I just say it got hit in the main deck. We papped up the hole. It's not a big deal. Or it landed in a guy's office, and, and he had a bit of a surprise the next time he came in.
And we didn't see him ever again.
Yeah.
That'd be true.
It would be true.
Although, most of the guys inside this turret would likely never have even noticed they'd been hit. The guys that were looking through the optics, they would have noticed something was
That
going
glass
on.
was shattered and the optics were pretty much so destroyed.
Right. But the guys who were,
Inside.
next to the guns themselves probably heard a dull thump, and that was about
At
it.
that point, I heard that the guy who was on that periscope there, he was slightly injured.
Oh yeah, all the shock transmitted through that. Yeah.
Not just that, the glass was coming through.
Isn't that a periscope? It's gonna separate after a while. Cast is usually a little weaker than rolled.
Well, I think if today it was hit by an 18-inch armor-piercing projectile,
Probably shatter it.
Yeah, it would
It
shatter.
would have the same effect as it would have happened in 1944.
Yeah.
Been a bit old.
So now we're proceeding to the O1. Yeah, okay, yeah. Go ahead, just sign out. Yeah.
Obviously, I talk about the accident. Depending on the group, if it's a bunch of small kids, I say we just had a bad accident, and sailors were killed, and we honor their memory, and then move on. If it's older kids, especially high schoolers who are probably learning chemistry, then I will go into a little bit of the chemistry of the powder kernels and how they're chemically formulated to generate heat when they are crushed or broken under pressure. And so I give that explanation for the explosion, which is like overramming, powder kernel crush, detonation out of battery, that sort of thing. I also tell people, look folks, I try and keep this tour pretty lighthearted and pretty fun, but this is a serious business. People have died. And so, especially if I'm talking like ROTC or something like that, I always say we appreciate you guys and what you do for us if you decide to join the armed forces. But understand, this is not a game, this is a job, and it can potentially be a very dangerous one. So know what you're signing up for.
Yep.
I sometimes mention about
Go ahead,
the
sir.
ranks.
Very, very rarely.
Okay.
Almost never.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not that we want to bury that history, because we don't, but we also don't want to spread any potential rumors about it.
Because there's enough out there.
There's enough out there, we don't need to add to it.
Okay.
If people really want to dig more into that, there is plenty of material out there. They don't need to get it from us.
There's a whole Wikipedia page on this.
Well, yeah, but, Wikipedia, so. Great for a good summary, and what you should really do is look at the sources that Wikipedia links to, but they never link to a primary source. Wikipedia is not allowed to link to primary sources, so.
So now we're proceeding
I
up
very,
to
very
O2.
briefly mentioned the captain's cabin, but not much, because we don't go inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
5-inch, 40s, 20s.
Well, I've been just in the magazine for this.
Something I've been doing is I've been waiting for them.
They don't have it painted on the deck here, but on the other side, they've got danger zone painted.
Yeah.
People always freak out. It's like, oh yeah, you're well within the danger zone right there.
Okay, going from starboard side to port side.
Yeah. Every single time I come through here, everybody always asks what the tanks are for.
Yeah.
Air gas.
For the hospital?
It's avgas, right? Aviation.
No.
No, welding
Air
gas
gas
is
is
what.
the company. It's CO2.
Okay, just
They have the replumbing up here also because they had CO2 bottles for putting a engine fire out.
okay.
So, but they had, in World War II, they had like 44 of these things lining bulkheads. But you also had oxygen acetylene as well.
For the
Right, for
hospital.
cutting through things.
No, for welding. For welding.
Welding.
Yeah.
Oh, for welding.
Cutting torches.
Oh, okay.
This is where, if they ask, I usually say, you have to remember, you don't have any place to pull into once you leave a dock. So guess what? If you have to fix something, it's gotta be on board. Welders, they need acetylene.
They're
That's what
shorter
these
bottle
tanks
though.
are. You know, these tanks are for things that you need. This is your home.
Where we come down from the missile deck
Yeah.
on port side, that space on the starboard side was lined with these. Like I've seen where they have, there's a rack and they're stacked,
That's right.
but they were smaller. I think those were oxygen bottles.
Yes.
These are oxygen bottles. Green is oxygen.
Green is oxygen.
Yeah, these here were, but back in World War, back when she was in service, Air Gas gave us these bottles because they're out of date. So they gave us the bottle. The company donated the bottles to us, so we could have a display on the ship.
I also like to mention here as well, because every once in a while I'll get like maybe every 4th or 5th tour I give, what is the X? What is the Z for?
Yeah.
And even though the Y is upside down in the portal, and you have dog zebra on the on that hatch there, I kind of roughly go over that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I get a question about that, I go over it. Occasionally, if I'm like scrambling for things to say about something, I'll talk about it if it's around.
And then of course I mentioned about the Red Cross and the D, decontamination.
Yeah.
I thought it was dental.
No.
No, decontamination, decon, yeah.
Okay.
So if you're out here during a chemical attack or a biological, nuclear attack,
You're dead.
yeah, well,
You're out here, you're done.
well, that's true. But you might have a chance going down to decom and scrub yourself down, maybe live for about a couple of hours.
I actually-
Maybe.
It's there to make you feel better.
Decon.
I just tell them, no, that D is for death. No.
No, I actually did the CBR studies for this class.
Okay.
Chemical,
Biological,
biological.
biological.
You're not blocking anything. Alright, so you're coming up.
Lean forward.
So this is usually. Oh, I'll wait till somebody else steps in.
I think it's the moss.
Yeah, David's back there.
This is usually about the point in the portions of the tour really start to fall off as far as details.
Attention
to
span.
add, because most of the things that you have around you are about regarding the operations of the ship, or things that the ship is doing while it's out at sea. So I mean, the obvious one here is the signal lamp. So I usually take this opportunity to briefly talk about communications, and how the military, wherever possible, tries to avoid using radios. You may have it on standby, powered up, but not emanating anything, because those emissions can be picked up much farther away than they can be understood. And if you have the right equipment, you can tell which way it's coming from. And if the enemy is in communication with a few other of their buddies that also have this equipment, you draw an X marks the spot, and that's where you want. So this allows us to communicate without using radios. And I'll also sometimes I'll mention the radars if
I
they're
talk
not
about the
kids.
smokestack.
Yep.
That it can go 14,000 nautical miles at 15 knots. It's a steamship. I asked them what powers this ship, and then they usually say something. And so,
It's nuclear powered.
yeah. But I tell them it's a steamship. It has
Nuclear
oil-
just heats the water.
Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, oil-fired boilers.
All the reactors
oil,
in tea kettle.
yeah.
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 If they were ever to bring these things back into service, I highly suspect they would, when in the modernization period, they would just put in a small nuclear power plant and call it a day.
They studied it, no go.
Before I go into the Admiral's Bridge, I tend to mention this gyro compass. Always ask kids, okay, you know what a compass is, right?
That's not a gyro compass.
Is it a gyro? What is it then?
It's an alidade.
It's an alidade, yeah. It's
Oh, okay.
what we use for
See
navigation.
the groove around?
I am not.
I have them try to draw the guest's attention to the thickness of the walls and the thickness of the door. And usually I mention the door weighs 4,000 pounds,
Yep.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's
Um,
usually a Marine standing out here.
Yep.
Shoot you.
Also ask them, look at the thickness of these walls and then compare it to the thickness of this wall. It's thick, but only 3 inch versus, you know.
Okay, and tell me again, what was this?
An Alliday.
Oh, I thought it was a gyro compass.
I stand corrected.
Man, don't be that guy.
Just fully
don't
look
be
out.
that. Okay, so we're going to go up to the navigation bridge. Eventually.
When you shifted it back.
What I did was the British goalkeeper was on board the magazine right up.
Yes.
Our gun was failing all the time.
Yeah.
So I went sent a message off to NAVSEA as a recommendation.
If I failed to mention the thickness of the walls on the Admiral's Bridge, then I mentioned them here.
Walls.
You know what I freaking made. And,
Don't be a
and
rivet
the,
cunt.
and then I mentioned the wheel.
The wheel, yes, I mentioned the wheels.
Although that's apparently not the original ship's wheel. That's a replacement that we found apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, apparently on the modern ships, the wheel is tiny.
Yes.
It's like that.
Now, interesting. That's the part that I would mention if I'm doing the history tour. You know,
Yeah.
explain the layout of the bridge and how it was an open bridge
I've mentioned that before.
compared to a closed
Yeah.
bridge.
Overnight.
Now, the only thing I don't know is when that year happened, but
44.
is that when it was?
Yeah. So
Okay.
when Dave mentioned that the ship took damage during Typhoon Cobra, and she took that shaft damage, she had to return back to the United States to get that fixed.
Right.
And when they did that, they did the refit and they put the enclosed bridge on.
Right. The Iowa and the New Jersey were both built with the open bridge.
Yeah.
New Jersey now, hers was enclosed, but just the roundness, what it was, didn't change shape.
Right.
And the reason why the Iowa didn't get that is because the time she spent with the president, and there was action, things were needed. But she did get like more 40 more guns put on when
Yeah.
she got back. I think she got a week, but that job there did not get accomplished.
Yeah.
And when they were out in the Pacific, cruising at high speed, the guys in New Jersey, they're like, yeah.
Okay, let's finish this up.
Yep. So, whatever on the history tour, yeah, you can talk about gunnery in this room here for the upper part of the conning tower. Occasionally, I'll point out what the Mark 37 fire director, but it's usually limited to this is what they actually use to aim the 5-inch guns.
That was actually done.
That's usually all I say.
We replaced them. It's all
With those antennas up?
The antennas, and I'll also mention that if you this was the only Iowa they actually put this antenna configuration on, because they found out that if you had all three, these two, and the one up on the bow going, it turns the center barrel into a live wire.
Oh, that's cute.
But
Yeah.
only this ship,
Yeah.
because they didn't follow the proper design on the brace for it. New Jersey, which did first, it was down lower the way it was made. For some reason, it didn't do that.
I like to think that
I didn't know
they
that.
probably found that out when the first time a seagull landed on it and detonated or something. But,
bird blew up?
Actually, it was
Yeah.
a sailor went up there and he touched the barrel and he got zapped.
oh.
What is the one importance about this?
This is where I actually tend to spend a little bit of time because I sort of compress, especially if I'm running out of time, I compress a lot of the 80s refit into this space. So obviously I talked about the Sea Whiz, but a lot of people refer to them as anti-aircraft guns. They're not really anti-aircraft guns. They're meant to shoot down missiles. And if I have time and if I've got an older group, I will go into a little bit of the theoretical. In the case of war with the Soviet Union in the 80s, we were really afraid that the Soviets were going to have long-range bombers flying into the North Atlantic, firing anti-ship missiles into our convoys. These are sort of a last line of defense against that. We are not meant to go and engage those missiles. If we have to use these things, something else is going horribly
Yeah,
wrong.
you lost your screen.
Yeah, or the screen is out of ammo.
Yeah.
They fired their
Which means
entire
you're gonna
missile
lose your
magazine.
screen.
So these are our last line of defense.
I think it was always
They don't go very
the
far,
airbox were last.
but
last
they are
edition.
but they're
This
awesome
is
weapons.
last, that came before.
Len says, supposed to be honest. Len has mentioned to me that because these used depleted uranium projectiles, that they trained to operate them if they were in port. In the case that somebody tried to storm the ship with armored vehicles, that they would depress the guns and they would fire them at the armored vehicles. I have a hard time they are going to take out a tank, especially like he says they're 6 inches of penetration. I doubt that. You're probably going to get 4 at best.
Well, it's the core.
Right, I understand that.
They don't use that. It's tungsten.
Right, it's tungsten or Teflon coated as well.
The Teflon be the coating. I'm talking about the core of the bullet.
Right, but I have a hard time believing that a 20 millimeter depleted uranium core is going to penetrate 6 inches of armor at virtually almost any range. 4 inches probably, but 6 inches that seems a little bit like wishful thinking to me. A little bit of its operation, I specifically try and mention the fact that it is unmanned. It is simply, it is run by a computer. You turn the computer on, the system goes into automatic mode, and it engages targets within arcs.
You know
Talk about the 3 phases that it's chaff, stick 42,
Yeah.
the stick 42, and
Yeah, I always mention that this is part of a system for defending the ship. This is just one part of 3. You've got the chaff launchers here, which try and fool the missile. You've got the Slick 32 cruise missile jammers, which try and confuse the missile's logic.
Which is the same that the shaft does.
Yeah, a little
It's
bit.
part of the thing. And then you shoot it down if it looks like it's going to hit you. Actually, this thing will probably engage it regardless, but...
Well, originally, you
Yeah, sometimes I'll mention these, sometimes I don't. Usually I don't. And I just point them out and say that, hey, and when I'm over there, I just say like, hey, these are the fakes that we put on to, have something here.
yeah.
Apparently, New Jersey can right in front of the open launcher, and now we'll talk about the Tomahawks. I try to emphasize to people that while this doesn't look very assuming, this is by far the most capable weapon aboard this ship.
Yep.
By a significant margin. I actually have a friend who did rocket artillery in the Army, and he worked with some TLAM systems, Tomahawk Land Attack Missile Systems.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about some, of course, the things he could tell me about. The new ones these days, they have the entire Earth's surface mapped in their memory on board the missile, so they know where they are even without a GPS fix.
I have a hard time just figuring out where my coffee maker is at.
Yeah.
You have a hard time figuring where your coffee cup is.
That's true.
Also, apparently, a bunch of coders, and the military was upgrading these things a while back, and a bunch of coders took a look at the coding for these missiles, and they found that the thing was leaking like a sieve, memory-wise, just all over the place. And they asked one of the designers about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, we accounted for that. We calculated how much memory it was leaking, and we just put in extra memory to give it more capacity, so that by the time it hit the target, who cared?" And so it had enough memory juice in it so that it could fly until it hit the target.
I find myself comparing a missile to a projectile
Yes.
for the kids, for the younger ones. Sometimes they don't know what a missile or a projectile is.
Or they just assume anything that flies is a missile.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if I tossed you over the side.
Yeah.
Missile?
So I
no,
try
no, he's
to
just a
make that distinction
screaming
as I go
alpha.
throughout the tour.
No, my shoes catch on fire and they light the engines.
The range on
I
these
fly
things
away.
isn't
After about 10 feet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Is it now 1,600 nautical miles, or was that what it was in the 80s? Here's my last stop. Y'all know what a harpoon is. I like to emphasize that you can shoot this thing off of a bunch of different platforms. Shoot it off of aircraft. You can shoot it off of ships. Or my personal favorite, you can fire it out of a torpedo tube from a submarine underwater.
They also have
Comes up, breaks the surface, fires, and takes off.
at the Nike base out here.
Uh-huh.
They had put launchers there for a while.